Amina, Commissioner,
Yes.
we just so you know, you are live in the conference room, which is full currently.
Okay.
I assume we'll be getting the meeting started shortly here, so just hang on the line and we'll get started soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Name, what's in the name?
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Barish, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Game and Control Commission. Before we begin, once again, I ask people to put their cell phones and such equipment on silent. With us today are George Augusto, representing Russell Redding, Secretary of Agriculture, Jennifer Langen, representing Joe Torsella, the State Treasurer, Bob Coyne, representing, technically, is it still Eileen or is she on? Representing Eileen McNulty. Thanks all for coming. Commissioner Young is joining us by phone from Philadelphia this morning. Good morning, Amina. Are you there?
I am here. Thank you. Good morning to all.
Hi there. I'd also like to welcome our newest board members this morning, Sean Logan and Dante Santoni. Welcome, gentlemen. Quorum of the board being present, I'll call proceedings to order. First order is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today we have one scheduled hearing regarding Greenwood Gaming Entertainment seeking approval to modify the gaming floor at the Parks Casino. Sorry. Before we begin, I'd like to note one housekeeping matter, specifically that the board's executive director, Kevin O'Toole, was involved in discussions with Greenwood on this subject that is the matter of this petition. Therefore, Mr. O'Toole had in no way been involved in any board discussion or deliberation of this matter. In fact, during yesterday's executive session, when we were discussing this, he left the room while the board was discussing the item that was on the agenda. Before we begin, I'd ask everyone who's going to speak, please state and spell your name for the court reporter prior to presentation. Additionally, I would ask any non-attorney witness to please stand and be sworn at the time they appear. Come forward, please. Over here on behalf of Greenwood, if you would identify yourselves and either be sworn or not sworn, as the case may be.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, may it please the Board, good morning. My name is Mark Stewart. That's S-T-E-W-A-R-T. With Eckert Siemens on behalf of Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment. Joining us today, who is unfortunately stuck on some gridlock, will also be Tom Bonner, Vice President, Legal and Chief Counsel for Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment. With me as well is Brian Schroeder. Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Brian Schroeder, last name S-C-H-R-O-E-D-E-R. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Chief Compliance Officer for Parks Casino.
And I am Matt Hayes, H-A-Y-E-S, and I'm the Corporate Controller for Greenwood Gaming.
Thank you. With the two of you, if you perhaps are going to be testifying, please stand and be sworn.
Mr. Schroeder is an attorney,
okay.
Mr. Chairman.
I do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. With that, we will proceed with our presentation, and Mr. Schroeder will begin.
Good morning, Commissioners. As you have the slide presentation in front of you, the purpose of today's presentation is Parks Casino's proposed OP 23.3 floor plan. It represents a solution to an issue that has arisen in the last 90 days of having our automated teller machines, ATM machines, removed from our casino floor and placed in non-gaming space. As you'll see throughout this slide, a casino layout for each casino is unique, and the layout and the plan to develop and design that casino is unique for each property based on the business decisions of that licensee. The locations of everything on the casino floor, be it slot machines, table games, ticket redemption machines, even valet kiosk, are thought out and planned for the customer and to maximize the experience in the building. The specifics in regards to OP 23.3 is a reduction of the gaming floor space by approximately 6,214 square feet. That represents a reduction of a little over 3.5%. It's a modest reduction, but it would allow us, Parks Casino, to operate our ATMs where we had originally contemplated them and where they had been for the last 7 years, with one location being 2 years old. So if we could just move on to the next one, I'll give you a quick summary. Currently, there's a little over 175,000 square feet of gaming space at Parks Casino. We have over 3,400 slot machines, 120 banking tables, 55 poker tables, and then we have 48 electronic wagering terminals that are related to hybrid games. And finally, we have 22 ticket redemption machines throughout the property and 14 ATMs. Now, our request for OP 23.3 We're not moving any slot machines, table games, or ticket redemption machines. It's simply we hope to return the ATM machines back to their original locations that were previously approved by this board in other OP plans. And I want to stress that each location, when they were installed, was tied to some type of other gaming floor modification, whether that be the opening of our new facility in 2009, or an expansion of table games, the increase of slot machines, or the increase of square footage in the back of the casino. The locations of the ATMs and the cash centers in general were well thought out decisions. I want to talk right now about our current locations to give you a sense of where we have them. So we have 2 locations now as a result of OEC's requirement that the ATMs be removed from the gaming floor. If you go to the next slide, Mark. This is a floor plan. It's tough to see, but if you have the slide in front of you, you'll notice there's 2 locations in blue boxes on the south eastern or bottom left-hand corner of your page, and they're the 2 locations that we have put the ATMs. Location 1 is adjacent to our Chinese restaurant Bamboo. There are 12 ATMs in that section. And location number 2 is inside our simulcast race book. And they're the 2 locations. I want to emphasize that on a daily basis, we've received complaints from our customers in terms of the location of those ATMs. If you look at that floor plan, there is no non-gaming space in the back of our building. So we designed the ATM locations, we spread them out, but now they're concentrated in one area. So it requires or older customers or other customers to walk from one end of the casino to the other. And that has been an issue that they receive daily complaints, both our Director of Security, Director of Table Games, Director of Player Services, as well as our General Manager. Now, I would like to highlight the actual specific request in OP 23.3. Specifically, there are 6 cash centers that we would like to return to. And I broke the slides down to identify each cash center so you can see how it's there, the original gaming floor plan border, and the new gaming border. So we would go to the first cash center. Yeah, well, looking at this slide, you can actually see, as I described, the locations are spread out around the building. In the front, the west entrance, in the back, as well as near the Chicken and Pete's restaurant and arcade. So we have a fully spread out of those 6 locations right there. So cash center number 1 is next to our Chicken and Pete's restaurant outlet. And what you'll see on that slide is originally the red line is actually the current casino border. The blue line is our suggested change. It's a bump out. And what that allows is those ATMs to go back to that location. There are 2 ATMs in that location. And it's a simple bump out that follows the carpet changeover right there. So it goes outside Chicken and Pete's around to the wall. And it keeps a continuous track as it goes down through the wall and back around. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the picture that if you look there, it's hard to see in this picture, but I want to point out there are 2 gaps in between the other machines. Those machines are ticket redemption machines. So the gaps in the middle are where the ATMs would be. And you'll see it better in the other pictures, but those spaces in between are not the same size. What I mean by that is it's custom designed. So the gap for the ATMs are a certain measurement. The TRMs would not fit into that space. So we built this to put the ATMs in there specifically. And it's actually highlighted much better in the next photo, which is cash center number 2. This is important. If you look at this slide, on the top left-hand side, that's our west entrance, is our second major entrance to the facility. So when you walk in there and you hang a left, you'll see a newly built cash center. It's approximately 18 months old. So I think the next picture shows it very well. So that cash center has 6 TRMs, as well as 2 ATMs that have been removed. And you can see the blank wood, the Teneo wood there that is in those spaces. And you can also see that the spaces are narrower than some of the other spaces that exist. And to the far left are 2 lottery machines. So this was just recently built with the addition of over 10,000 square feet of gaming space about 2 years ago that this board approved that location. The next one is going to be towards our valet pickup. There are actually 2 locations, cash center number 3 and number 4. Number 3 is in our exclusive room, which is our high limit slot room. It's limited to just 1 ATM. And cash center number 4 is at our valet pickup, where people pick up their cars to leave the building. And if you go back, Mark, 1 second, please. And if you see again, you'll see the red line, the blue line are following the same border until you get to the high limit room. It just bumps out to encompass a 1 ATM machine in our exclusive room, and then bumps out again to encompass Cash Center 4 and those 3 ATMs there. So if you go mark the next picture, this is Cash Center number 3, and the bump out would occur on that pillar to the right. It would bump out and go back to the wall, encompassing that TRM machine, a valet kiosk, and the space that would hold an ATM. For Cash Center number 4, we have I know some commissioners maybe knew, we have a full glass wall there. So I apologize for the glare from the sun coming in. You can see the 3 spaces for the ATMs that are missing there. Again, custom built and designed, and provides, we would just bump it out where the far right, you see a screen that's a valet kiosk. It would go across to the other screen and back in. And that leaves us to Cash Center number 5. Cash Center number 5 is near our food outlet Foodies, and also valet drop-off. That site has 3 ATM machines, and this is much easier to see the bump out gaming floor space from the red line, which is the exterior wall, to the new space, which is along the border of the tile. And that gives a lot of additional space, non-gaming space. If you go to the next picture, you can see the large space that exists there, how we would bump it back. And again, the 3 ATM spaces that are missing. And again, we'll talk about later, the aesthetic that we're trying to build at the casino in terms of clean lines, high quality finishes, and all this was well planned out and built, designed that way. And finally, Cash Center number 6. These are 3 ATM machines that are next to the Racebook simulcast area. And actually, we have 2 of these machines have been moved into the simulcast Racebook area. The other one was moved into the food restaurant space, currently with 11 other machines. Again, if the border continues to be the same until it just bumps out at this one part, encompasses those machines and TR machines, it goes back to the wall. If you get the picture, you can see those are the 3 spaces for the ATMs and where they belong, and then it would just come back into the wall and go around to our casino cage, which is a restricted area. Mark, you want to handle the next one?
Sure. Picking up where Mr. Schroeder left off, the proposed modifications really, in their essence, simply bring in the perimeter of the gaming floor off of the interior and the exterior walls. The modifications would address OEC's concerns about ATMs while ensuring compliance with the Gaming Act. They would preserve the aesthetic of the casino, as Mr. Schroeder testified about, and they will avoid material harm to the financial interests of both the Commonwealth and parks. In terms of compliance with the Gaming Act, Parks is the entity that chose initially to design its gaming floor so that it went all the way to the interior and the exterior wall. As Mr. Schroeder commented, each facility is unique. There is no requirement in the Gaming Act or the board's regulations that mandates that the gaming floor extend all the way to those walls. And I don't believe that that fact is in dispute based upon OEC's answers. And initially, obviously subject to PGCB review, Parks had the discretion to set the boundaries and to design its casino. It was designed and built to maximize the customer experience. Part of that is ensuring convenient locations and access for patrons to their funds. And all of the cash centers, as has been mentioned, have gone through prior board review. Really, in terms of the Act, the only potentially applicable requirement here is in the board's regulations at 465A29. And that regulations statement that ATMs that, quote unquote, offer credit card cash advances may not be on the gaming floor. At least our interpretation, and I think it was express or explicit, of OEC's objections, we believe that they misapply sections 13A27 and 1504 of the Gaming Act to suggest that even ATMs off the casino floor could be violative if they allow patrons to access their cash either through credit cards or debit cards to be used for gaming play. If you look at those sections, however, you will see that they apply to house credit. It is credit that is extended or cash that is advanced by the casino, for instance, at its cage. And casinos like Category 1 casinos, they have different rules for what they can do at their racing outlets and what they can do at their cage. They cannot extend credit. They cannot accept credit cards for advances themselves. The only provision that's applicable here in Section 13A27 is the last sentence of the section, which also states that no credit card advance machine may be placed on the floor. The ATMs at parks are owned and operated by third-party providers and banks. They are not owned and operated by parks, and they do not constitute parks accepting credit cards or advancing cash. Other than that last sentence of 13A27, the sections simply don't apply to the ATMs. And the claims to the contrary, not only being inconsistent, would be incredibly impractical and would have very significant consequences for the gaming industry in Pennsylvania. As Mr. Schroeder said, and I think as all of you are aware who have been to Parks Casino, considerable effort and thought and expense was put into the building and the facility to ensure a modern, clean, and elegant aesthetic. Both in 2009 and in subsequent updates, those designs were worked on, were thought out, were presented to the board, were approved, and then were subsequently implemented and built. And you saw in the pictures that there were custom millwork, very nice finishes around the cash centers, some of which were actually just recently built, as Mr. Schroeder indicated. Parks' view is that it should not be required to resort to bad fits or kind of stuffing these ATM machines in different parts of its facility, particularly where there's an alternative like OP 23.3, which is fully compliant with the Act. Moving on to the last goal that we have with this plan is preventing material harm to the economic interests of not only Parks but the Commonwealth. As the board is well aware, Pennsylvania is a convenience gaming market where patron convenience drives revenue. Parks is very well versed in this business model. We certainly understand that and many times when it's discussed in the context of patron drive time and how close they live to the casino. Parks' experience as, frankly, the top grossing casino in the state is that this model and the convenience gaming market, it filters down through their entire operations. And that the forced consolidation of the ATMs into the current locations is significantly less convenient for its patrons. You heard about the testimony about the complaints. You saw the floor plan of the current locations and how far certain patrons, depending on where they are on the floor, have to walk to access an ATM. And this loss of convenience has had a negative impact on the financial aspects over the subsequent days and months. And for that, I will turn this over to Matt Hayes to discuss some of those statistics.
Well, as Brian and Mark have already touched on, that inconvenience has definitely driven down transactions. And you can see that right there. Almost 16% fewer ATM transactions over the last 3 months since we made this change. That's translated into almost 6% less money being taken out of those ATMs. And as you'd expect, our slot win and our GTR is down about 2.5%, almost $2.5 million. So I think those numbers speak for themselves as to the impact that this change has had on us.
And finally, we wanted to address the issue of credit card advance machines and OEC's position in this matter. This is, to be frank, this is not a finding that you have to make in order to grant OP 23. But we believe that the board has the discretion to find that the ATMs in question are not, in fact, quote-unquote, credit card advance machines. That is the term that's used in Section 13A27. It is not a term that's defined anywhere in the Gaming Act. The evidence in this matter would indicate that the ATMs here, there's no signage, there's no advertising, there's no indication in any way that you can get a credit card advance from these machines. In fact, every public-facing aspect of these machines indicates exactly the opposite. The credit card advance feature or option when you're looking at the screen, if you're a patron using the ATM, you try and press it, it's disabled. You cannot use it. You actually, as the patron, have to specifically select withdraw from either your checking account or your savings account in order to access money from these ATMs. And the transactions themselves are subject to debit transaction cash withdrawal limitations. So as a patron going to one of these machines, there is nothing about it that would indicate that you could get a credit card advance from it. Moving beyond what the patron sees, even from the systematic aspects of it, the operations of the machines, the merchant category code, the transaction codes for these withdrawals code them as ATM withdrawals, not as credit card advances. And the transactions are sent to the patron's issuing bank for their card over the ATM debit payment network and not across the separate payment network that is utilized for credit card cash advances. So, and let me just ask Mr. Hayes, as controller, are you familiar with these facts being applicable to the ATMs at Parks?
Yes, I am.
All of these facts, we believe, would form a sufficient basis for the board to interpret the act and find that ATMs with these characteristics are not the type of credit card advance machines envisioned in that section of the act. Nonetheless, as I said, you do not need to make that finding today because OP 23 resolves this matter by taking the ATMs off the gaming floor as defined. So, in summary, or in conclusion, we'll simply state that OP 23.3 allows a return to the previously board-approved status quo. And with that, we are available for questions or cross-examination as the board directs.
Enforcement Counsel, do you have a presentation or question?
I do have a presentation. I don't know if you want to do the questions or do you wait until
I want to hear what you have to say
presentations?
first, and then
Okay.
we'll open it up.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. As you've heard this morning, Park seeks to modify its gaming floor by reducing its gaming floor by 3.363% to accommodate the placement of ATMs around the gaming floor. This matter originated from an investigation by the Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement with assistance from the Bureau of Casino Compliance, which revealed that ATMs on the gaming floor at Parks Casino and other Pennsylvania casinos were allowing the use of credit cards for an advance of currency to play slot machines in violation of the Act. Further, the ATM manufacturer indicated to BIE and the Office of Enforcement Counsel that there's nothing it can do to prevent the use of credit cards at its ATMs to obtain cash. As a result, we asked that the ATMs be moved to their current locations off the gaming floor. Park seeks to return the ATMs to their previous locations by designating these former locations as non-gaming space. Since the ATMs have been moved, the Bureau of Casino Compliance received a number of inquiries from patrons at Parks Casino asking the new location of the ATMs, but has not received any complaints about the new location of the ATMs. The Office of Enforcement Counsel feels that Parks' plan is unnecessary as there is sufficient space in the casino to accommodate ATMs without reducing the gaming floor space and is done merely to circumvent the requirements under the Act. Parks' purpose for the requested ATM relocation is so patrons on the gaming floor have immediate access to ATM, debit card, and credit card cash advances in order for those patrons to utilize the funds to play slot machines and table games with as little deterrence as possible. Parks acknowledges in paragraph 10 of its petition that a significant amount of cash utilized to play its slot machines originates from ATM transactions in the casino. The question is not whether the off-the-gaming floor placement of ATMs that allow credit card and debit card transactions are allowable. The Act, supported by board regulations, allows for the placement of these ATMs in the licensed facility. The question is whether or not it is allowable under the Act to allow such placement within close proximity to slot machines and table games around the gaming floor when Parks readily admits that a significant amount of money used in slot machines and table games originates from these ATMs. Further, it is not in dispute that these ATM machines allow patrons to use a credit card to obtain cash. We've heard in Parks' presentation about the definition of credit card advance machines, the Office of Enforcement Counsel feels that's just semantics. If you can submit or insert a credit card into an ATM machine and obtain cash, we feel that that's a credit card advance machine. Section 1504 of the Act provides that slot machine licensees such as Parks shall not accept credit cards, charge cards, or debit cards from a patron or player for an advance of coins or currency to be utilized by the player to play slot machine games. Further, Section 13A27A of the Act provides that a certificate holder, such as Parks, shall not accept credit cards, charge cards, or debit cards from a patron or player for an advance of coins or currency to be utilized by a player to play slot machines or table games, and that no credit card advance machines may be placed on the gaming floor. Parks points out in its presentation that the proposed locations of the ATMs have been approved in the past. However, at the time that those locations were approved, there was no evidence that patrons were able to use credit cards to obtain currency, and there was no concrete evidence that patrons were taking the money that they obtained at ATMs and using it to game at slot machines and table games. With these facts now known and admitted, this has become a matter of first impression, which is ripe for board interpretation of the applicable sections of the Act. The Office of Enforcement Counsel believes that the manifest intent of the legislature in this instance is clearly to protect the public through the regulation and policing of all activities involving gaming. It is clear throughout the Act that the manifest intent of the legislature is to combat issues related to problem and compulsive gambling, and the board has consistently followed through from a regulatory perspective in that regard. The General Assembly does not intend a result that is absurd, impossible of execution, or unreasonable. The General Assembly intends for its statutes to be effective and certain, and when in doubt, favors the public interest against any private interest. As a result, it is clear that the General Assembly did not intend to have credit card advance machines on the gaming floor of any casino in this Commonwealth. Additionally, it is also clear that the General Assembly did not intend for slot machine licensees or table game certificate holders to accept credit cards or debit cards in any manner for the advance of coins or currency to be utilized by a patron or player to play slot machines or table games. This does not preclude the placement of ATMs in non-gaming areas of the facility in order for patrons to access funds for non-gaming related items or services, such as food, beverages, gifts, entertainment, transportation, etc. It is not the intention of the General Assembly to make it convenient for individuals to drain their bank accounts or increase their credit card balances for purposes of playing slot machines or table games. The request by Parks seeks to redesign its gaming floor for this very purpose. When a gaming floor is redesigned for the placement of ATMs, coupled with ATM placement being solely related to advancing currency through debit and credit card transactions, so that patrons may be advanced currency to play slot machines and tables as depicted in Parks' petition, such redesign and placement should be denied and should be found contradictory to the mandates of the Act and the manifest intent of the General Assembly. Any placement of the ATMs in a licensed facility should be sufficient to provide a gaming patron or player a cooling-off period when utilizing an ATM by providing a sufficient space between the ATM and the gaming floor. The ATM placement should also allow some distinction from gaming play and ATM utilization to maximize the chances or comfort that the funds are being utilized for some purpose other than slot machines or table game play, such as pari-mutuel wagering, entertainment, transportation, or food and beverage purchases, or to minimize the chances that funds are utilized for slot or table game play. We are not naive, and we know that patrons will access funds through ATMs and use those funds to play slot machines or table games. However, that does not mean that we should be complicit or tacitly approve these actions by ignoring the mandates of the Act by making such access less burdensome and convenient for the private benefit of Parks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions from people on the board?
I have a couple. Mr. Hayes, I have a question on the diminution of gambling receipts, gross gambling receipts,
Okay.
and the 2.5% number, I
Right.
presume, over that 90 days. Are there any other reasons, causes, or rationalities that would support that diminution? Or are you maintaining that it's exclusively because of the relocation of these machines?
I wouldn't say it's exclusive, but I would say the majority of it contributes to that decline.
And how, can you be more specific? I mean, that's an opinion.
We have
Yeah.
not seen this kind of decrease over the course of as long as we've been open. So the fact that this is dipping down and we haven't had any weather issues per se, that would have caused it. So that leads us to believe it's more in line with the moving of the ATMs.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, a couple of questions for you, sir. First, is it your position that these machines are only debit machines, that someone who puts a card in would not get a receipt back home 30 days later that would show it to be a credit transaction?
We acknowledge that the nature of the transaction is ultimately determined by the patron's issuing bank of their card. So it is possible that, I'll say that it has, as has been reported by OEC, we acknowledge that machines can be overridden, that the safeguards on some of these machines that were discussed can be overridden, and the transaction can be treated as a credit card transaction if that is how the bank, the patron's bank, treats the transaction when it reaches the bank, wherever that is.
Have you had this is for the panel, have you had discussions with the provider of these machines and the banks behind them about software that would absolutely and positively stop a credit transaction?
Yes, we have. With Every is our ATM provider. They're working on software. It's rather complicated, and it's in research right now.
So it's not a question of cost, it's a question of it can't be done technically at this point in time.
That's right.
Is that your testimony?
That's right.
Okay. And Mr. Stewart, back to redrawing the lines. If I took an ATM machine and put it directly in the middle of the gaming floor, directly in the middle, assuming there's nothing physically there, obviously, I place it there, and then draw a line around it and say that's not the gaming floor, using your logic, would that be permissible?
Well, we have not proposed that type of gaming floor change. If the board approved that type of gaming floor change, then yes, it would be permissible. But we have not suggested that. OEC early on stated that if gaming floor changes were going to be considered, they did not want to see islands like the one you just described created. We don't believe that our proposal creates such islands. I would say two additional things. One, you heard it describe our proposed floor plan change. You heard it described by OEC as unnecessary. We would respectfully submit that that is a decision that's within the business competence and discretion of the licensee. Even as the chairman certainly knows, there's many cases out there that talk about how regulatory agencies, even ones with expansive powers like the board, are not super board of directors. But certainly, in terms of deciding what's necessary, we think that there should be discretion afforded to the licensee when it's consistent with the law, and we believe it is here. The second thing is that I wanted to mention is just that in terms of that kind of intent of the law, there would be really no difference if we bumped out the wall 3 feet. Is that somehow more consistent with and then put the ATMs there? Is that somehow more consistent with the spirit of the act than simply moving the gaming floor line off the interior wall? It's not a requirement that it go to the wall. Other casinos have it off of the wall. In some of these instances, it even follows the tile or the carpet patterns. And I think, Mr. Schroeder, there was a comment about proximity. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that.
If the commissioners could go to slide 8, that's our current location for the simulcast race book. You'll see 2 ATMs that were approved by the executive director there. If you look closely,
Back up for a second until we get the slide up,
sorry,
please.
I thought you had paper in front of you. I apologize.
Okay.
So in this slide, you'll see these 2 machines were approved by the executive director, and the gaming floor, actually serendipitously to describe this, is the carpet change. So you see the carpet gets changed. So those machines are approximately 2 feet off the gaming floor. And you can also see a little bit further to the left, a slot machine right there. That machine's approximately, the back of the machine is probably 3 feet to the ATMs. It's probably 4 feet to the seat of the chair, or 4.5 feet to that chair. So proximity is that this was allowed 90 days ago. And in addition, I guess just for background, where this camera is located, if you look directly below this camera, there are 2 cash advance machines for our simulcast racebook that have been approved and located in the racebook since day one when the building opened in 2009. And those machines, when they were originally put in the racebook, were approximately, because I remember having measuring tape out, were exactly 12 inches off the gaming floor. They're now about 4 feet, and you don't see them in the picture. But they actually give cash advances. It says cash advance. That's what they're designed to do for the simulcast wagering and clientele. So they're located right there. They're not invisible in the picture, but they are there. Just to point out.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I do, Dave. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Mr. Hayes with regard to the decrease in revenue. Would it be possible for you to maybe dive down a little deeper, or as my predecessor would have said, peel the layers of the onion away, and break that down? Instead of being a 90-day period, could you perhaps do it either by month, give us 3 months of how that revenue has fallen off, or perhaps increased over the 3 months, or maybe even weekly?
I think we've seen it pretty steady over that period of time.
Okay.
It wasn't dramatic changes. We certainly had fluctuations in business, which is just normal.
Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a big drop off after you moved them initially in December, and then it has gotten less and less as we moved towards March, as people got used to where the machines were?
As Brian has shown me here, we did start off closer to 20% drop in transactions.
In December.
That's right. And then it leveled off more to the 15s.
Okay. And a question for Mr. Miller. Have any of the other casinos put machines in that have fixed the credit card advance issue?
No, we're not aware of any.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, if I can. Gentlemen, the problem here apparently is not just at Parks, but at a lot of other casinos. ATM machines were put in that did allow individuals to make credit card cash transactions. Would that be correct, Mr. Stewart?
Yes.
That's the sum of the issue here. If these were straight ATMs with no, that is, debit card machines with no chance, no possibility of withdrawing on a credit card, we wouldn't be here. Would you agree with that, Cyrus?
What I would agree with is that we were unable to distinguish that. The only way we found out was that patrons started to complain that they were able to do this. Somebody stole my money after I accessed the machine. I think we would like an interpretation for the board with regard to the debit card transaction and whether or not that is allowable under the Act. Because this has been an issue for some time. I've received reports in the past, patrons are able to get debit card transactions and take that money and go play slot machines. Well, in order for me to prove that, I would have to be able to track the money that came out of that machine that patron used and used to play table games or slot machines. And that's, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very, very, very a very complicated scheme just to determine that. So I think Parks' petition allows us to answer, twofold question. If the ATM is only a debit-related ATM, is the board comfortable with those machines being on the floor and patrons being able to access those debit funds through their debit card to play slot machines and table games? That is the main interpretation I'm looking for. It's clear that credit card advance machines cannot be on the floor.
So if your inquiry goes even deeper than I thought, but you're even questioning the policy that the board has permitted since day one.
Yes.
Didn't know that.
It's not so much the policy that the board permitted. It's whether or not, I mean, we know the ATMs are on the floor if they can only do a debit card transaction. But if a patron uses those funds is that considered an advance of currency by the casino operator who has a contract with the ATM provider and receives fees for every transaction that occurs from those debit card transactions?
Even if it's not a credit transaction?
Even if it's not a credit card transaction, is the board comfortable with those funds, a patient accessing those funds, and then utilizing that to play slot machines or table games? Is that considered an advance of cash or currency by the casino, considering that the casino has a contract with the ATM provider and receives a fee per transaction? That's my big question.
But I have to tell you, Cyrus, that makes me really confused, because I thought that was settled here in Pennsylvania, that if it's a debit transaction, a machine that does debit transactions, they're allowed on the casino floor. That's what the statute says.
Mm-hmm. They're allowed on the floor.
What right would we have to say, well, okay, we're not going to allow them anyway?
Well, it's not so much allowed on the floor. It's what the money is used for that is taken from those machines. Or is it?
We have to assume it's going to be used for
Well, I don't know if we can
gamble, right?
Well, you can assume it can be used to gamble. You can assume that it's being used to eat at a restaurant. You can assume that it's going to be used to get a taxi ride home. You can assume a lot of things. Based on what the Act is saying that cash or currency cannot be advanced for the play of slot machine table games when you use a debit card. So that's...
Excuse me. Yes, sir. You have...
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on point. It has been decided in Pennsylvania from day one. It is in the actual verbiage of the statute where it says the certificate holder shall not extend or advance the cash, and the slot licensee shall not extend the cash. Parks does not, and no casino in Pennsylvania actually takes their cash, extends it to them. OEC's position is trying to essentially get to the ATMs through a contractual relationship or a lease of the space for the machines. Not only would their position take ATMs off the floor, they would take them out of the entire building. And that has never been an interpretation of this statute by anybody that I'm familiar with from the advent of its passage in 2004.
And I completely disagree with Mr. Stewart says as to what I'm saying. Okay, what I'm saying is, first of all, the board has never made an interpretation with regard to money advanced using a debit card on a ATM to play slot machines or table games, and that's all I'm simply looking for. Okay, can a casino licensee use a third party to do what it can't do on its own? So, yes, ATMs, there's no question that ATMs are allowed anywhere in the facility except on the gaming floor if they allow credit card transactions. Barring that, they're allowed anywhere in the facility. If it's an ATM that only does debit card transactions, yes, it's allowed anywhere.
But you don't think they should be?
No. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that when the purpose is getting that money from the ATM to play slot machines and table games, is that okay under the Act? That's the interpretation I'm looking for. The only way to get to an answer with regard to this is for us to put forth that argument and this board to make that decision.
But that happens now, no? At every casino.
Well, but we can't prove that. You see, in order for me to prove, if you're asking me, I assume, yes, it happens. It happens every day. I assume that it's happening at Parks right now, that a person goes to the ATM off the gaming floor, gets a credit card cash advance or gets a debit card advance, and then goes and plays a slot machine or goes and play table game. Can I prove that? In order for me to prove that, I have to say that the money taken from this machine during this transaction ended up on the gaming floor in this. I can't prove that. I mean, it's virtually impossible for me to prove that.
But as somebody, Cyrus, who is as experienced as you are in the industry and in regulating it, you have to reach the determination that, yes, if not 80%, 50, 60% of this money is probably being used to gamble.
I can't reach that determination because I didn't have any proof of that. I think First of all, I think that Parks what Parks has said is that this is what happens. And I'm okay with that, but I need an interpretation from the board. I get reports all the time that, or a complaint all the time that somebody used a debit card, drained our bank account to go and play slot machines and table games. How can this be allowed? Or I get complaints of reports saying that people were able to access use debit cards on the gaming floor to play slot machines. Well, I can't prove that. I'm assuming that's what happens, though. I need an interpretation of the act to say that this is okay. This issue has never come before the board because there was never any proof that this was occurring. Now that Parks has admitted this is occurring, this is the perfect time for the board to interpret that statute. And that's all I'm looking for, an interpretation.
Okay, Cyrus. So let me ask you this then. It would seem to me that Counsel for Parks is saying, and I think is probably accurate in saying that, assume back at the beginning when they built the place, instead of using the walls, knowing somehow that, well, people will be able to use credit cards in these machines, then if we're going to put them where they are, then we're going to have to put the border for the gaming floor over where they want to do it now. I would assume, as Counsel for Parks is assuming, that the board would have approved that.
Yeah, that would be subject to board approval. And I assume the same.
So your issue really isn't with the rebordering here. Your issue is really fundamentally with whether or not these machines should be there at all, even if they're just debit machines.
Not whether or not they should be there.
Oh,
whether or not it's allowable for people to use those machines to get an advance of cash or currency to play slot machines and table games.
And if we say, okay, we think it is,
then
you then don't have a problem with what they're trying to do here.
No, I just need an interpretation.
Okay.
Commissioner Santoni, do you have a question? Now, I've got a couple of questions. When you look at the fact that your revenues apparently decreased for 3 months, do you know the breakdown of the nature of the withdrawals that were being made from those moved ATM machines?
What do you mean by nature?
How much of it were debit transactions versus credit transactions before and after the move?
We only see them as I think Brian and Mark have already touched on. We only see them as ATM withdrawals. I mean,
So
over the 90 days.
You don't have the data. You don't have the data that can distinguish.
Chairman Barish, I can tell you that the ATM providers have told me that they can't distinguish the transactions.
That's fine. I have to come back to a comment that Mr. Stewart made that troubles me.
I hate those comments.
Hey, it's life, right? Commissioner Jewell asked you a question about, what would stop anybody, instead of cutting a carve out, to just place the ATMs, whatever you want to call them, right in the middle of the gaming floor and just draw a little line around it and say that's not gaming floor. And I'll give you another chance. I don't really, what I thought I heard you say, I don't want to characterize what you said. You're basically saying that if the board said that was okay, that would be okay. That's what I thought you said.
Well, first of all, ATMs themselves, by board regulation, can be on the gaming floor, so you won't even have to.
We understand what we're talking about. We're talking about machines where you can get a credit advance. Okay,
Sure.
let's just cut through the gobbledygook here. I thought I heard you say that if this was a situation where, but basically instead of doing what you did, if you said, what we're going to do, we're going to put ATM machines more centrally located. We're going to spread them all over the casino floor generally, but we're going to create little islands around every one of them and say that's not a gaming floor. And I think you said that, that would be permissible by the act if we approved it. I thought you said that. Now, if you didn't, I want to give you a chance to clarify that.
Well, clearly I didn't say that. No. All I'm commenting on is that the sentence in the statute is credit card advance machines cannot be on the gaming floor. I believe it. No credit card advance machine may be placed on the gaming floor.
I
is the
heard that.
sentence.
I heard that. But I'm asking you, if instead of moving the way you did
I
it-
would say that type of island created, certainly the board would have ample, authority to deny that request.
they'd have ample authority. You think that granting that request would be consistent with the statute?
You could reach the conclusion that it would be inconsistent with that sentence of the statute, that it would put form over substance, and it would essentially violate that sentence.
You could argue that. That's
You-
what you're
yeah.
saying.
You could certainly make that finding.
I mean, I understand, maybe just to tweak the language a little bit. When we were evaluating this, we thought the request that we were making was reasonable based on the walls built and the border, because as Mr. Stewart said, we could try, I don't know if it's possible, blow a hole in the wall and drop it back
I understand.
3 feet. I would say that an island, as you're describing, of 4 or 5 slot machines in the middle of the floor cut out with nothing related, may be an unreasonable extension, maybe an unreasonable interpretation of that. Because I don't think I'd have a problem coming in arguing that those 4 in the middle of the island. I think you have the authority to approve that, as Mark was saying, 100%. But I believe it's a much harder sell because of the reasonableness of it. And that's why we looked at that's why we made this request, because the way we designed the building and the walls and the structures and the carpet gave us the opportunity to explain why we think it's a reasonable request, well within the purview of the board and us as a business operator, and to have you look at it. And that was before Cyrus's comment in terms of the general act and what the ATM machines were. We thought it was a reasonable request, and we think that because we think it's an option, it's a complete option we have.
Other question is, at the time when you designed this thing, I presume, as every other casino knew, you were going to have cash, I'm using the term generically, cash advance machines, that whether you want to play games about whether it's a debit or a credit transaction, skip that. You knew you were going to have them on the floor. Casinos all over the country have them. I shouldn't say on the floor, in the building, okay? At the time when you were doing this, did you know that these debit machines could actually advance credit?
No.
And had you known that, would that have changed the way you designed your floor?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's it.
I have a couple more questions. There are some inferences here we're dealing with. Cash is fungible, and we're trying to figure out inferences, and I hear Cyrus's discussion there. I want to go to inferences of human nature, and that is, I wonder if 90 days is long enough. And by that I mean you have your regulars and you have your first-time callers. And your regulars now realize there's been a change. In life, there's changes of ATMs or whatever, different, one's closed, something's open somewhere else, you got to go further for it. And you make your adjustments accordingly. You come into the floor and you say, all right, ATMs are where, restrooms are where. There are certain things you want to know about or need to know about if you're thinking strategically how you're going to be spending your time and your money. And so I wonder, is 90 days sufficient? Do we need a longer period of time to study this and understand it better? And why don't people make those adjustments? Because we do that. I mean, we do that in life all the time, don't we? When we move things around.
I think our customers have. The average withdrawal, excuse me, has gone up, but it certainly hasn't gone up enough to cover what they had been playing in the past.
And I would follow up with just a couple comments in regards to that. In talking with our operations staff about customer complaints about the location, our director of table games, but more importantly, director of player services, I believe, stressed to me, the regulars, as you talked about, there was a large complaint for the first month, and those regulars have complained less. Now we have the first-time people visiting on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they're upset that they can't get to the machine. So it's transitioned, to your point. The people who play more consistently know where they're at and can think strategically, but all new customers we're trying to attract are kind of upset that if they come in, if they park their car on the West Entrance and come in, they have to walk across the building to get to the ATM. And they don't know, and they know that when they see a sign, they don't know that coming, they don't know coming into the building. And second, casino players are somewhat fickle. If they like a particular game, they're going to play on that game, and that game might be across the casino floor. Could they play the game closer to the ATMs? Absolutely, but that might not be the game they like. and that becomes a problem.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, just, Mr. Chairman, Cyrus, obviously, the statute says that cash advance machines can't be on the floor, but there is no prescribed distance. That's clear, right?
That's
And
correct.
in fact, from slide 8, it's also clear that approved machines are very close to the floor at parks. And I have seen schematics of other casinos, and it's clear to me that those machines are also very close to the floors of other casinos. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that is in the simulcast area, and I
Right.
believe you can use those advances, George, you can correct me if I'm wrong, to play to simulcast wagers, so.
So that's pretty well uniform throughout the Commonwealth. If you look at the location of these machines,
As long as
they
it's
are
not
very close to the floor.
As long as it's not gaming floor space, they can smack up against it, you know.
Thank you,
So-
sir.
Can I, Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, so if you get this modification, it's the same machines?
We would simply move the machines that are located
So
out
you-
back in their spots.
There's still the problem. I mean, you can put them on the roof and people are still going to be able to take cash out and there's a outrageous interest charge on it.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't
Yeah,
solved
that's-
your problem. We're just
That's what, yeah, that's.
moving the problem around.
Yeah,
The
you-
machine, the technology isn't changing.
Well, I mean, I
It's the
think.
same machine.
Yeah, it's the same machine. It's going to be, that part of the floor will be designated non-gaming floor space. So it'd be in a non-gaming area. I guess I go back to what I'm looking for,
Sure, I
an
understand.
interpretation with regard to those funds. And can they be utilized can they be utilized to play slot machines and table games?
Same machines now. Let's,
I'm finished, Mr.
If
Chairman.
there's no
Thank you.
other questions, the board will take a brief recess to
Just have a matter of housekeeping, Chairman. We have a set of pictures, 10 exhibits.
Okay.
We provided them to Parks previously. We'd like those admitted into the record.
That's fine.
And may we have our presentation admitted?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Adjourn.
Picture.
Amina, you back on? Amina, are you back on?
I am indeed. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bob and George. Okay. Do we have Amina? Is Amina back on the line?
Yes.
Okay. So just waiting for the ex officio. On the record now. Doug, could you come forward and tee up the issue for the vote for us, please? Yes. Let's deal with we've discussed things in executive session, and before we proceed, if you present the issue.
Yes, Chairman, there are two issues that were presented in this action as articulated by the parties earlier. The one is with respect to the petition to modify the gaming floor, but the other issue I think needs to be resolved first, and that was the issue which Enforcement Council raised concerning whether or not strictly a debit ATM machine in which an individual can access their own funds from their checking or savings account, which they already possess and own that are in that account, whether that type of machine on the floor that's used to for the individual to obtain their own money is prohibited. It is the opinion of the Office of Chief Counsel, and always has been, that the provision of the Act reference to, given the language and the context, that does not prohibit that type of straight debit card machine from being on the gaming floor.
Okay. I think we're all clear on that.
Okay.
For somebody who isn't, please speak. Okay. With that, I'm going slightly out of order. Let's deal with this issue, this motion, and I'm going to return to some old business for a second, and we'll proceed.
Sure. And in this matter, obviously, it's a petition for Greenwood Gaming Entertainment, the request to approve the modifications to the gaming floor. You've received all of the various documents, the maps, diagrams, and had the benefit of the presentation of both parties, as well as the answers they've provided to you. And with that, it's appropriate for a motion by the board.
Okay. Is there a motion on the Greenwood matter?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc.'s petition for approval of modifications to its existing gaming floor as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nope.
No.
No. The petition's denied. Before we proceed to the next matter.
Don't know if we got a vote from.
Oh. Amin, are you there?
I am. Aye, yes.
Were you a yes or a no vote?
I was a yes vote. Aye.
Okay. So that was
There still is a failure to obtain a qualified majority in favor of granting the relief, and thereby operation of the failure of a qualified majority, the petition of Greenwood Gaming is not granted.
Okay. Before we proceed to the next matter, I want to just circle back because we wanted to get rid of that. We spent too much time in session there.
So, excuse me, could we just get some indication of how the votes went? It was difficult to tell.
It's 3-4.
Right, but who was the yeses?
The yeses were Moscato, Ryan, and Amina Young. The 4 were the rest of us. Okay. Just going out of order here slightly. By way of old business, the board met in executive session yesterday, March 21st, to conduct quasi-judicial deliberation relating to the matters being considered by the board today. In addition, I would like to announce that the Gaming Control Board will hold a public hearing for the casino license for Downs Racing LP, operators of the Mohegan Sun facility, on March 29th at 10 a.m. at the Plains Township Fox Hill Fire Hall at number 2, located on 52nd Street, Plains, Pennsylvania. Citizens and community groups and elected officials wishing to present oral or written testimony, which will be part of the evidentiary record, can register by clicking on the quick links section of our homepage, www.gamingcontrolboard.pa.gov. The deadline for registration to speak at the hearing and for receipt of public comment on the on the Mohegan Sun renewal is noon Monday, March 27th. Written comments should be mailed to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board at Post Office Box 69060, Harrisburg, PA 17106. Attention Board Clerk. Comments can also be faxed to the Board Clerk prior to the deadline at 717-265-7416 or emailed to the Board Clerk to the Board at boardclerk@pa.gov. Also, I'd like to consider a motion to approve the minutes and transcripts of the January 11th and January 1st, 2017 meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the minutes and transcripts of the January 11 and February 1, 2017 meetings.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Under new business, we'll hear from Kevin O'Toole at this point.
Good morning, Chairman Barish. Good morning, members of the board. On behalf of the staff, I too would like to welcome our new commissioners, Commissioner Logan and Commissioner Santoni. We look forward to working with you. I know it's getting late in the month of March. March is a very important month because it gives everyone the opportunity to think about the social issues involving gambling, compulsive and problem gambling. So we like to, it is in fact recognized as Compulsive and Problem Gambling Awareness Month. So I'm pleased to introduce our director of the Office of Compulsive and Problem Gambling, Liz Lanza. Liz and her assistant, Elizabeth Birch, do an outstanding job of bringing awareness of that important topic all throughout the year. But Liz will give a little bit more information about the significance of March.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Before you today is a resolution proclaiming March as Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Problem Gambling Awareness Month, or PGAM, originated 13 years ago as National Problem Gambling Awareness Week. It is transformed through the growth of outreach events into a month-long public awareness campaign. The goal of PGAM is to bring cognizance to the devastating effects of disordered gambling through the uniting of organizations that provide problem gambling services. Through public advocacy, it is our goal to promote the value and importance of prevention, treatment, and recovery of gambling disorders. Through joint efforts with the Pennsylvania Council on Compulsive Gambling and the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, the Board's Office of Compulsive and Problem Gambling has set up booths throughout the month of March to spread awareness. The OCPG also attends many senior fairs and health fairs throughout the year to broaden our outreach to citizens of the Commonwealth. The Board continues to acknowledge the importance of identifying individuals with gambling disorders and providing tools like the Board's self-exclusion program and treatment options to individuals with gambling problems and their families. For more information on these tools or to find local treatment providers, I urge those affected to call the Pennsylvania Council on Compulsive Gambling's 24-hour helpline by dialing 1-800-GAMBLER. And if it pleases the Board, I can now read the resolution into record.
Please.
Whereas the legislative intent of the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development and Gaming Act recognizes in part that the public interest of the citizens of this Commonwealth and the social effect of gaming shall be taken into consideration in any decision or order made pursuant to the Gaming Act. And whereas the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board recognized the social effect of gaming when it created the Office of Compulsive and Problem Gambling to conduct research, develop public outreach efforts, work with the Pennsylvania slot machine licensees to develop and implement problem gambling programs at licensed facilities, administer the PGCB's self-exclusion program, and promote problem gambling education programs in this Commonwealth. And whereas the Gaming Act established a special fund to be known as the Compulsive and Problem Gambling Treatment Fund and required that all money in the fund should be expended for programs for public awareness, prevention, research, assistance, and treatment of gambling addictions. And whereas problem gambling is a public health issue affecting Pennsylvanians of all ages, races, gender, and ethnic backgrounds in all communities. And whereas problem gambling is treated and treatment is effective in minimizing the harm to individuals, families, and society as a whole. And whereas numerous individuals, professionals, agencies, and organizations in Pennsylvania have dedicated their efforts to the education of the public about problem gambling and the availability and effectiveness of treatment. And whereas promoting awareness of problem gambling is an opportunity to educate the public and policymakers about the social and financial issues related to problem gambling. And therefore, the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board hereby recognizes March 2017 as Problem Gambling Awareness Month. We encourage all citizens to learn more about the signs of problem gambling and to help spread the message about the availability of treatment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion?
Yes. Liz, first, thank you for the work that you do and your whole department. So we, as board members, appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve Resolution 20173 CPG as described by the Director of Compulsive and Problem Gambling.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you very much. Next, we will be hearing from our Administrative Director, Claire.
Good morning. I think it's morning still, right? Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. The Office of Human Resources has one motion for your consideration today relative to the hiring of two individuals. Ms. Katie Tyler and Mr. Michael Brandt have been selected as casino compliance representatives in the Bureau of Casino Compliance. Ms. Tyler will be assigned to Sugar House Casino and Mr. Brandt will be assigned to Lady Luck Casino. Both individuals have completed the PGCB interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and are recommended for hire by the Bureau of Casino Compliance. Unless you have any questions, I ask that the board consider a motion to hire Ms. Tyler and Mr. Brandt as indicated.
Thank you. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applicants as proposed by the administrative director.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Doug, now we'll come back to you.
Our first agenda item relates to a proposed regulation, which Assistant Chief Counsel Susan Yoakum is here to present.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. As mentioned, I do have one agenda item for your consideration today. It's a proposed rulemaking 125-205. It will begin the process of incorporating approximately 19 of our statements of policy into our existing body of regulations on table games. We've utilized the statement of policy process to allow operators to more quickly use side wagers and variations of existing table games rather than going through the formal rulemaking process, which can take up to a year plus. It's always been the intention, once we got a collection of statements of policy, which we have approximately 40 at this point, it's always been the intention that once we had a collection of them that we would transition them into the permanent regulations. So as stated, there are 19 contained in this rulemaking. In addition, there's a new table game that's going to be added. It's Four-Card Frenzy. Included in that provision are the rules of play, dealing procedures, and permissible payout odds. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to adopt proposed regulation 125-205 as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to petitions now. We have disposed of the Parks Greenwood Gaming petition, so that leaves two other petitions for your consideration today. Both are being presented solely on the documentary record with no additional evidence to be taken. The first matter is that of Chester Downs and Marina, and it's a petition for approval of a shared services agreement. By way of background, in August 2009, Harrah's Philadelphia and its management company entered into an agreement giving the management company the responsibility for providing centralized services relating to Harrah's development, construction, and operation. Those services included certain functions relating to accounting, quality assurance, internal audit, market research and planning, HR services, IT, risk management, and legal services. Subsequently, the management company delegated those responsibilities to Caesars Entertainment Operating Company. In May 2014, the Caesars Entertainment Operating Company and other Caesars-related entities established yet another limited liability corporation called Caesars Enterprise Services. And that group was for the purpose of providing shared services to numerous of the Harrah's flag properties. Caesars Entertainment Services and the related individuals and entities have applied to the board for licensure and are before the board for approval later today during the Bureau of Licensing's presentation. Assuming the licenses are approved, Harrah's Philadelphia is now requesting that the board approve the May 2014 agreement that authorizes Caesars Enterprise Services to perform and be reimbursed for services previously provided to Harrah's Philadelphia by the Caesars Entertainment Operating Company. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to the petition, subject to conditions which are outlined in their answer. It's worth noting that while OEC originally requested as one of the conditions that there be a separate shared services agreement specific only as to the Harrah's Philadelphia property with Caesars Entertainment Services, OEC has withdrawn that request based upon stipulations filed of record by the parties, and I believe that's actually contained within paragraph A.11 of the stipulation, which is in the record before you. In addition, Harris Philadelphia has requested that the actual management agreement, which is attached to the original petition as Exhibit C and attached to the stipulation as Exhibit 1, be held as confidential as it contains the terms of the privately negotiated agreement. OEC does not contest the confidentiality of that agreement. And given those two caveats on the condition and the confidentiality, it's now ready for the board's consideration to grant the motion of Harris to approve the shared services plan and to maintain the confidentiality of the agreement.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Chester Downs and Marina LLC's petition for approval of a shared services agreement with conditions 1 through 3 and 7 in OEC's answer. I further move that petitioners' unopposed motions for confidentiality be granted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you.
The second petition before the board is that of Tracy Van Brocklin, and it's her request to be removed from the board's involuntary exclusion list. On August 21st, 2013, the board issued an order placing Ms. Van Brocklin on the involuntary exclusion list after it was found that she left her 7-year-old child unattended in her vehicle at the Hollywood Casino, where she gamed for about 20 minutes before being paged by security, who actually found her son wandering on the Hollywood property trying to find his mother. On January 17th of this year, Ms. Van Brocklin requested that the board remove her name from the list, stating that during a recent Google search, she was surprised to see herself on the board's website. She stated that she wants the record removed as it's disparaging and believes it should be an internal matter and not in the public domain. Other than expressing her dissatisfaction with her name being on the list, Ms. Van Brocklin did not provide any documentation or reasoning as to why she should be removed from the list. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed an answer, but has not objected to the request. The matter is now ready for the board's consideration.
Any questions or comments from the board? Or should I say, before I proceed, is Ms. Van Brocklin present? I didn't think so. Okay. May I have a motion, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny Tracy Van Brocklin's petition to be removed from the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw applications or surrender credentials of the following individuals and entities: Jeffrey Johnson, Bryant Richards, Stephen Beeson, Thomas Reardon, Charles Toland Meredith, Andre Victor Gallardo, Gary Anthony Vecchiarelli, Emily Adams, Management Enterprises Holding LLC, Management Enterprises LLC, MEH Manager Inc., and National Business Research Institute Incorporated. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objections to any of the withdrawals or surrenders. However, OEC does object to National Business Research Institute's request for a refund of their application fee, as that fee by our regulations is non-refundable. The Office of Chief Counsel concurs with that assessment as to the non-refundable nature of the fee. So the matter is now before the board for the board to grant the withdrawals or surrenders, and it would be doing so without prejudice.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders as described by the Office of Chief Counsel, including that the refund request of National Business Research Institute, Inc. be denied.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next before the board for consideration are 9 reports and recommendations received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. These report and recommendations, along with the evidentiary record for each hearing, have been provided to the board in advance of the meeting. Additionally, the persons involved have been notified that the board is considering their matter today and that they have the right to be present to briefly address the board. If any of these persons are present today and wish to address the board, when I announce the name of the individual, they should come up and come forward and have a seat here to my left, and I think we have at least one individual that will be present. The first report and recommendation is that pertaining to Daniel Brault. Mr. Brault was issued a non-gaming employee registration in October 2010 and worked as a valet attendant at Parks Casino. On December 15th, 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for an emergency suspension of Mr. Brault's non-gaming employee registration after receiving notice that he had been charged with several criminal offenses, including one felony account. Specifically, on November 29th, 2016, Mr. Brault was pulled over by police for driving erratically. He allegedly refused to obey and cooperate with the police, and consequently, the situation became physical between him and the police officers, resulting in Mr. Brault being tased until he submitted. As a result of the charges, the executive director issued an emergency suspension as requested by Enforcement Counsel. Subsequently, a hearing on the validity of the emergency suspension was held. OEC appeared and offered testimony and documentary evidence. Mr. Brault appeared at the hearing and testified on his own behalf. He brought a friend with him who witnessed the incident and testified that the charges against Mr. Brault were unwarranted in his opinion, and that any contact with police was the result of involuntary movements caused by being tased. The report and recommendation issued subsequent to the hearing recommends that the suspension remain in effect until at least disposition of the criminal charges, and that's the matter now before you for consideration.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of Daniel Brault's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board pertains to a report and recommendation regarding Jack Buscemi's petition to be removed from the board's involuntary exclusion list. By way of background, in 2008, Mr. Buscemi pled guilty to one count of conspiracy money laundering for his part in a sports betting ring run out of the poker room at the Borgata Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City. As a result of his conviction and his frequenting Pennsylvania casinos, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Buscemi on the exclusion list. A hearing on that matter was held in March of 2012, and in August of 2012, the board placed Mr. Buscemi on the involuntary exclusion list. On August 11th, 2016, approximately 4 years after his initial placement on the list, Mr. Buscemi filed a petition requesting his removal from the exclusion list. OEC filed an answer objecting to the request, and a hearing was held on October 13th of 2016. Both OEC and Mr. Buscemi and his counsel appeared at the hearing and provided testimony and documentary evidence. Mr. Buscemi testified that since his 2012 hearing, he has actually been removed from the New Jersey exclusion list. He has disassociated himself with those involved in the sports betting ring, has completed his intensive supervised parole, has continued to support the community center, which oversaw the parole program, and he's financially supported that center and also worked as a mentor at the center. Additionally, Mr. Buscemi submitted several letters attesting to his good character and the work he has done at the center. He stated that he's a professional poker player and has had to travel to other jurisdictions where he was not excluded from casino play in order to make a living. Notwithstanding the evidence presented by Mr. Buscemi, the report and recommendation before the board recommends that he remain on the involuntary exclusion list. The hearing officer noted in his report that the board regulations typically require a person to remain on the exclusion list for at least 5 years prior to being granted removal, and in this case, the 5-year term runs in August of this year. Mr. Buscemi has filed exceptions, reaffirming his position as to why he should be removed from the list. And his reasons include, but we're not limited to, the fact that he was not involved in any criminal conduct in Pennsylvania and that he's not a career criminal. The matter is right for the board's consideration, and given the posture here, I want to point out a vote to adopt the report and recommendation would result in him staying on the exclusion list. A vote to reject the report and recommendation would be that he would be removed early.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reject the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Jack M. Buscemi Jr.'s petition to be removed from the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And the result is that Mr. Buscemi will be then removed. So that we're
That's
clear.
correct.
Okay. The next matter to be heard is the report and recommendation pertaining to Bang Chen. In June of 2016, the Enforcement Council filed a petition requesting...
Excuse me one second. It's been pointed out to me I misspoke. The motion was rejected, not adopted.
Correct.
You note that?
Yes.
Small matter.
In June 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition requesting that Mr. Chen be placed on the board's involuntary exclusion list, alleging that in May of 2016, while gaming at Hollywood Casino, Mr. Chen pass-posted bets on several occasions. As a result, the state police charged him with crimes under the Gaming Act, and the charges remain pending at this time. Mr. Chen requested a hearing which was held on November 3rd, 2016, and at that hearing, OEC presented testimony, documentary evidence, and a copy of the surveillance video. Mr. Chen appeared pro se and testified on his own behalf, stating that he did not intend to cheat and that his actions were the result of him not understanding how to play the game. The hearing officer found, however, that the surveillance video presented showed that Mr. Chen only pass-posted bets at times when the dealer was distracted and his view was blocked. As a result, the report and recommendation issued and now before the board recommends that Mr. Chen be placed on the exclusion list, and that's ready for the board's consideration.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeal regarding the placement of Bang Chen on the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter is the report and recommendation pertaining to Clarence Cross. In July 2016, Mr. Cross submitted a non-gaming employee application seeking work as an EVS attendant at Sugar House Casino. On August 5th of that year, Office of Enforcement Counsel issued a notice of recommended denial of his application based on the nature and recency of some criminal convictions. Specifically, in 2009 and 2012, Mr. Cross was arrested and charged with crimes stemming from a domestic situation, including on one occasion violations of a protection from abuse order. Additionally, in 2014, he was arrested and charged with criminal offenses stemming from allegations that he threatened the family law judge overseeing his custody matter. Mr. Cross requested a hearing which was held on November 2nd. OEC appeared providing testimony, witnesses, and documentary evidence. Mr. Cross, along with his counsel, appeared at the hearing and testified that the 2009 and 2012 incidents were the result of the mother of his child not complying with the custody schedule, and he testified that the 2014 arrest resulted from the judge misinterpreting his intentions, which in fact were to thank her for her work. After hearing the evidence presented, the report and recommendation was issued recommending that Mr. Cross's non-gaming registration application be denied, as he has not shown himself by clear and convincing evidence to be suitable for licensure. That's the recommendation before the board.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Clarence Cross's non-gaming employee registration application as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter is the report and recommendation relating to Brittany Glass's petition to lift the suspension of her gaming permit. By way of background, Ms. Glass was issued a gaming permit in November 2015 to work as a table game dealer at Harrah's. In April of 2016, Enforcement Counsel was notified that Glass had been charged by the Philadelphia Police Department with forgery, fraud, tampering with public records, and unsworn falsification to authorities. And those charges arose from her actions with other co-conspirators involving the theft of motor vehicles. An emergency order suspending her permit was signed by the executive director on April 22, 2016. A hearing was held in May of 2016, and the board issued an order on August 10th of 2016 directing that suspension remain in place. On October 21st, 2016, Ms. Glass filed a petition requesting that the board lift the suspension of her gaming permit because she had entered an ARD program with regard to the criminal charges, and that she had not been convicted, and that all charges would be expunged upon completion of the 24-month ARD program. A hearing pertaining to the petition was held December 13th of last year, but despite receiving notice, Ms. Glass failed to attend, and the hearing was held in her absence. The Office of Enforcement Counsel appeared, offering testimony and documentary evidence indicating that the criminal charges are still pending and will continue to be pending until she has successfully completed the ARD program. The report and recommendation recommends that the suspension remain in effect until at least the time that she has actually completed the ARD program, and that's the recommendation before you for consideration.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the petition to lift suspension of Brittany Glass's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Okay, the next report and recommendation pertains to Gloria McNeil, who I'm informed is, it's right here. Okay. Ms. McNeil was issued a non-gaming employee registration in April of 2015 and worked as a food court attendant at Valley Forge Casino until she was terminated by Valley Forge in March of 2016. On September 6th of last year, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to revoke her registration, and the complaint alleged that on February 26th of 16, Ms. McNeil conducted a cash transaction with a patron at Valley Forge during the course of her work duties, where she took a $5 bill from the patron in exchange for a soft drink and placed the bill in her shirt pocket. She did not record the transaction in the cash register. It should be noted that there were no criminal charges filed in this matter. A hearing was held on November 3rd of last year. Both OEC and Ms. McNeil appeared at the hearing, presented testimony and documentary evidence. During Ms. McNeil's testimony, she did not admit to any theft. She did admit that she may not have followed the correct protocol for providing complimentary items to patrons. She testified that she had seen management personnel serve complimentary drinks to customers on many occasions, and that the individual she served a complimentary soft drink to was a regular customer. After providing the customer with the soft drink, Ms. McNeil's customer handed her a $5 bill, which she tried to return to the customer. And as can be seen on the surveillance video, he would not take it and motioned it back to her. Ms. McNeil then kept the $5 as a tip. After taking all the evidence into consideration, a report and recommendation was issued, finding that OEC's request should be denied and that Ms. McNeil should remain suitable to hold a non-gaming employee registration. That's the recommendation that's before you for consideration. As I stated, Ms. McNeil is here and I think would like to address the board briefly.
Would you like to say anything on? Oh, I should let you stand and be sworn first, please. Please proceed with whatever you wish to share with the board.
I agree with everything on there. Still remain the same.
Can't hear.
I'm sorry. I agree with everything that's on there. I still remain the same way. That's it.
Okay, thank you, but thank you for coming. Any questions or comments from the board?
Just to be clear, if we adopt this, we're giving her her license back. That's correct?
We're not taking her license. That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. She will retain, the report and recommendation is that she retain her registration, so a motion to adopt would allow her to retain the registration and then seek other employment.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the revocation of Gloria McNeil's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion's adopted. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
The next report and recommendation relates to Stephen Min's petition for removal from the involuntary exclusion list. On April 1st, 2011, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Stephen Min on the exclusion list, averring that Mr. Min had been arrested on 9 occasions as a result of behavior at 6 different casinos, and he had been evicted from all but one of the Pennsylvania casinos in operation at the time. Mr. Min's behavior consisted of pinching and capping bets, harassing patrons and employees, actually posing as a Gaming Control Board employee, and criminal trespass for entering casinos after he had been evicted. As a result of his actions, on August 18, 2011, the board placed him on the involuntary exclusion list. August 24th of 2016, Mr. Min filed a petition stating that it's been 5 years since his placement on the list, and he's now requesting to be removed. OEC filed an answer objecting to Mr. Min's request, stating that since his placement on the list, he has violated the board's order on 9 different instances, resulting in at least 8 more convictions. A hearing on the matter was held on November 10th. Despite receiving notice, Mr. Min did not attend, and the hearing was held in his absence. Testimony and documents were offered by OEC, and resulting in a report and recommendation that Mr. Min remain on the exclusion list. And that's the report before you for consideration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Stephen Min's petition to be removed from the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next report and recommendation relates to Paul John Spadola. On August 15th, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Spadola on the board's involuntary exclusion list after it was found that on March 5th, 2015, and then on June 18th, 2016, while playing blackjack at Mohegan Sun, he was observed capping bets. He was criminally charged on both occasions and pled guilty to 1 count on each occasion. Mr. Spadola requested a hearing, which was held on November 8th, 2016. Despite receiving notice, he failed to attend, and the hearing went on in his absence, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel presenting testimony and documentary evidence. The report and recommendation before you recommends that he be placed on the list, and I'd ask for a motion to that effect.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Paul John Spadola's placement on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And the final report and recommendation pertains to Althea Wallace. Ms. Wallace was issued a non-gaming employee registration and worked as a EVS attendant at Parks Casino. On March 28, 2016, a patron at Parks reported losing 2 vouchers totaling more than $1,425. Upon review of video surveillance, Parks confirmed that the patron dropped 2 vouchers on the casino floor, and that while performing her job duties, Ms. Wallace swept up the vouchers into her dustpan and immediately entered the restroom. Surveillance also shows that Ms. Wallace, at the end of her shift, left in a vehicle, which then returned to the casino about 18 minutes later. An unidentified man exited the vehicle, entered the casino, and redeemed the same 2 vouchers. Upon questioning by the state police, Ms. Wallace admitted to her actions and returned the money. She was charged with 2 counts of theft of property, and as a result of the incident was also terminated from her employment. A hearing in the matter was held on November 22, 2016, and both OEC and Ms. Wallace appeared at the hearing. Ms. Wallace testified on her own behalf, admitting to her conduct, but asking that her registration not be revoked as she felt such action could negatively impact her ability to secure future employment. After hearing all of the evidence presented, a report and recommendation was issued recommending that her non-gaming registration be revoked, and that's the recommendation before you for consideration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was daydreaming there. I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the revocation of Althea M. Wallace's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And that ends the long list of items for the Chief Counsel today.
Thank you, Doug. Good afternoon, Sue.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be a table game manufacturer renewal license and 768 principal, key, gaming, and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be the consideration of 22 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the renewal of the Genesis Gaming Solutions, Inc. table game manufacturer license. Genesis Gaming Solutions is a Texas-based company that manufactures table game layouts and other hardware and software solutions for casino, pit, and poker room management. Genesis Gaming Solutions has asked the board to grant it a reduced licensing fee. The licensing fee for a 3-year manufacturer's renewal license is normally $90,000. Under the Gaming Act, the board may modify a fee for a table game manufacturer if it determines that that fee will unreasonably limit table game devices or associated equipment. Consistent with this provision of the Act, the Bureau of Licensing has adopted a reduced licensing fee policy, which takes into account the number of manufacturers that produce a particular product, as well as the amount of revenue that a company anticipates making from sales. This policy has previously been presented to the board. Genesis Gaming Solutions has requested a reduced fee of $10,000, which is consistent with the Bureau's policy. The Bureau of Licensing recommends that the board grant the reduced licensing fee. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of Genesis Gaming Solutions, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the order to renew the table game manufacturer license along with a reduced licensing fee.
Thank you. Any comments, Cyrus?
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the renewal of Genesis Gaming Solution, Inc.'s table game manufacturer license as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 16 principal and 8 key employee licenses. These include principals associated with CES, the Caesars Enterprise Services company that was the subject of a petition earlier in the meeting. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Question. Oh.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are also temporary principal and key employee licenses for your consideration. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 3 principal and 18 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order granting these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
In addition, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 463 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits and 215 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the Board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Also, there are recommendations of denial for 3 gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing these applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the Board consider the motion denying these gaming applicants.
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you.
Next for your consideration are withdrawal requests for key gaming and non-gaming employees. In each case, the permit or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided the board with a list of 2 key, 32 gaming, and 8 non-gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the orders approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, we have an order to certify the following gaming service providers: Bangarang Enterprises, LLC, doing business as Gander Group; Baumgardner Floor Covering Limited, doing business as BFC Limited; Hampton Technologies, Inc., doing business as Gordon Group Electric; LaFrida Meats, Inc., doing business as Pat LaFrida Meat Purveyors; Larry McRae, Inc., Leaf Guard of Lake Erie, doing business as Bauer Specialty; McRae Gordon, a joint venture, LLC; McCade Texas, LLC, doing business as Mosac, M Partners, and Momentum Media Partners; and Mintz and Hoke, Inc. I ask that the board consider the order approving these gaming service providers for certification.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 13 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed? All opposed? Motion's adopted.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you very much. Next up, Office of Enforcement Counsel.
The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 18 matters today for the board's consideration. Those consist of 3 consent agreements, 2 suspensions, and 13 involuntary exclusions. The first matter on the Office of Enforcement Counsel's part of the agenda is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 1 licensee Downs Racing LP, doing business as Mohegan Sun Pocono. The matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel John Crow.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. John Crow, C-R-O-H-E, Assistant Enforcement Counsel for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement reached between Mohegan Sun Pocono and the Office of Enforcement Counsel regarding 5 incidents wherein the board's regulations governing underage gaming were violated at Mohegan Sun Pocono. The first incident occurred on June 23rd, 2016, where a 20-year-old patron gained access to the gaming floor at Mohegan Sun without being asked for identification and was denied check cashing privileges by a cage cashier after handing the cage cashier his identification to complete the transaction. After further review, it was determined that the underage patron, Jeremy Kane, was also present at Mohegan Sun on June 18th, 2016, at which time he gained access to the gaming floor without being asked for identification, was able to obtain $100 in cash through Western Union, and was on the casino property for approximately 2 hours and 35 minutes, gamed for 1 hour and 45 minutes during that time at various slot machines, and conducted 2 cash transactions at the cage, and conducted 3 ticket redemption unit transactions. The second incident occurred on August 1st, 2016, where a 15-year-old minor was discovered on the gaming floor, and at the time of its occurrence, this incident was not reported to the casino compliance representative on duty or the Pennsylvania State Police. The minor patron was on the gaming floor for approximately 23 minutes and gamed for approximately 5 minutes at various slot machines. The third incident occurred on August 3rd, 2016, where a 20-year-old individual, Cesar De La Vera, was discovered at Cage 1, Window 1 at Mohegan Sun, attempting to cash $200 in chips. Mr. De La Vera entered the gaming floor by the bus entrance without being asked for identification and was on the casino property for approximately 3 hours before it was discovered that he was underage. During this time, Mr. De La Vera gamed for approximately 2 hours and 38 minutes and conducted 1 ticket redemption unit transaction and 1 cage transaction at Cage 1. The fourth and fifth incidents occurred on September 10th, 2016, where a family comprised of 2 adults and 2 underage children accessed the gaming floor. The 17-year-old child gained access to the gaming floor multiple times over a period of approximately 1 hour and 42 minutes, and the 12-year-old underage individual accessed the gaming floor multiple times over approximately 2 hours and 23 minutes. Neither underage patron gamed or consumed alcohol during this time. The Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mohegan Sun respectfully request that the board approve the consent agreement and the stipulations of settlement, which require that Mohegan Sun implement policy and procedure to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future, that Mohegan Sun pay a civil penalty of $70,000 as well as $2,500 for costs incurred by the board staff in connections with investigations into this matter.
Mr. Chairman, I neglected, Mr. Stewart is here on behalf of Mohegan Sun, and I'm sure he can introduce the people he has with him.
Thank you, Mr.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Stewart.
Yes, nice to see you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, with me is Tony Carlucci, C-A-R-L-U-C-C-I, President and General Manager of Mohegan Sun Pocono. Next to him is Lynn Segars, S-E-G-A-R-S, Vice President of Casino Operations. And also with us is Tony McGowan, M-c, capital G-O-W-A-N, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Mohegan Sun.
Just to cover ourselves, if the 2 individuals are present, would stand and be sworn in case there's a question of any of you.
I do.
Thank you very much. You have some comments, Mr. Stewart?
Tony, Richard.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as outlined in our consent agreement, obviously we take this very seriously. We've made several adjustments, one major one being the amount of entrances into the casino. The amount of entrances into our casino. We went from having 14 entrances down to 4. In addition to that, we've also reduced the size of these entrances. We were having several issues. As an example, the 12-year-old that was on the floor, our entrances were somewhat close to 30-something feet wide. And surveillance shows, this is not an excuse, just explaining the situation and the problem with our entrances. The surveillance shows the mother distracting the security officer as she waves the 12-year-old on the floor. Again, this is not an excuse, but the problem we believe that we've addressed is having 14 entrances leaves that many more to training our line level employees to 24/7 and things of that nature. Having less entrances as well as reducing the size of these entrances makes it much easier to train these employees, as well as we've had some incentives for these security officers, so many days without a minor getting on the floor. We've adjusted that to put these incentives in, as well as hardwired scanners at Cyrus's request, which we've installed them as well. We've done numerous training in the last couple of months, so the point to this is not to make excuses, because obviously we're embarrassed by this, is to let you know that we are taking this very serious, and we will continue to take these matters very seriously.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone?
I have a comment. I think your remedial actions are material, substantive, and appropriate.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, you said you reduced the entrances from 14 to 4. You didn't reduce the exits, did you?
We have, and Lynn Seegers, my Vice President of Operations, can speak to this. We have egress access that would open up automatically, right, should there be an emergency. So they're basically these gates. Lynn, maybe we can jump in and explain that a
Yes,
little bit better.
so in essence, what we did was cut the casino in half. The one side is all ages, the other side is over 21. And so on that other side, there are no more rails. You can enter and exit however you want, but it's in the area between the two kind of checkpoints, if you will, where security is there to check IDs and things like that. And then on the other side, there are two emergency gates, which are tied to the fire panel. There's a panic button on there as well. We worked with the local fire department to have this approved as well. So all of our exit points are satisfactory to the fire department.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, how much time did it take for you to make these adjustments to your facility once this problem became apparent?
Probably a couple of months.
Okay. Was there much in the way of cost in this?
Over $200,000.
In the grand scheme of things, we feel that's nominal.
On the other hand, you say increased cost. On the other hand, I gather since you've gone from 14 points of access to 4, what's happened to the number of people who'd be checking IDs? Has that been reduced, or are they now totally concentrated on 4 locations?
So what we did was at each of those entrances that are now only 11 feet wide, that used to be 21 feet with 1 guard, now there are 2 guards at the 11-foot entrances at each of those, plus 2 at our main valet entrance, and so we still have the high limit entrance. So we have not reduced the number of security, just made it their job a little easier.
And actually, Mr. Chairman, they increased the number of roving security officers.
Well, I'd be very curious.
Inside and outside the building.
I'd be very curious over the coming months. It seems to me, I would agree with Commissioner Jewell. You people have obviously made some significant changes that logically should produce much better results. I'd be very curious in seeing what your experience is over the next number of months, and don't be shy. I'm sure Enforcement Council will let us know, but we sure would like to know how you're progressing and how these changes are actually affecting what's going on there. You may not be stopping more people. Maybe more underage people won't even bother to try, so it may be hard to identify the consequence, but nevertheless, I applaud you for what you're doing. Any other questions or comments?
Just one question. So I believe I'm correct in saying this. You are the oldest casino in the Commonwealth, right? You were the first to open?
Correct.
10 years plus. It opened in December of 06. You said you had a 21-foot entryway with 1 guard. Was it that way from the date you opened?
Yes, yes.
And now you're down to 11 feet and 2 guards?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I'd like a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Downs Racing LP as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 3 licensee Valley Forge Convention Center Partners LP, doing business as Valley Forge Casino Resort. This matter will be presented by Senior Enforcement Counsel Glenn Stewart. Mr. Fabius is here on behalf of Valley Forge. And Mr. Fabius, would you make your appearance, please?
Sure. This is Michael Fabius from Ballard's Bar, representing Valley Forge Casino Resort. Fabius is F-A-B-I-U-S. With me is Janet Morgans, Compliance Officer. And would it be appropriate to have her sworn in?
Yes, I believe it would.
I do. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last name. So that's... It's Maugans, M-A-U-G-A-N-S.
First name Janet.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's Stewart, S-T-U-A-R-T, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next for the board's consideration is a consent agreement entered into between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 3 slot machine licensee Valley Forge Convention Center Partners, LP, doing business as Valley Forge Casino Resort. For approximately 123 days, Valley Forge allowed a non-voting member of its board of directors to serve in that capacity, even though that non-voting member did not hold any valid license, permit, registration, or any other authorization issued by the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Moreover, to serve as a non-voting member of Valley Forge's board of directors, this employee was required to hold a principal license. However, this employee held only a key employee license for approximately 152 days while serving as a non-voting member of the board of directors. Overall, Valley Forge allowed an individual to serve as a non-voting member of its board of directors for approximately 275 days, even though that individual was either not licensed by the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board or that individual held a lower level of license than is required for that position. The terms of the consent agreement would require Valley Forge to pay a civil penalty in the amount of $14,500 for allowing an unlicensed employee to serve on its board of directors for approximately 123 days, and for allowing a key employee licensee to serve in a position requiring a principal license for approximately 152 days. Valley Forge is also required to remit a $2,500 fee to the board for investigative costs incurred in relation to this consent agreement. As such, this consent agreement is now right for the board's consideration.
Any comments from Valley Forge?
We concur in Mr. Stewart's description of the facts, and we're available for any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from the board on this matter? In that case, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Valley Forge Convention Center Partners, LP, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Ms. Natalie Bono. This matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel David Tepper. We're told that Ms. Bono is studying overseas, and she agrees with the consent agreement, but she could not make it here to the board meeting.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barish, members of the board. On August 20th, 2016, Natalie Bono, who was 20 years old at the time, attempted to enter Mount Airy Casino and was asked for identification by Mount Airy security personnel. At that time, Ms. Bono produced a false identification card, which identified her as being 22 years old. OEC engaged in negotiations with Ms. Bono, and Ms. Bono has entered into this consent agreement by which she agrees to be placed on the exclusion list until at least her 22nd birthday, which is April 3rd, 2018, or 1 year after this consent agreement is approved by the board, whichever date shall occur last, after which time she may petition to be removed from the exclusion list. At this time, OEC requests that the board approve the consent agreement as entered into by the parties.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Natalie Bono as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next two matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the suspension of one gaming permit and one non-gaming registration issued to individuals by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in each complaint. The individual named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named individual. Thereby, all the facts are deemed admitted as they are stated in the complaint. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we'll read a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Sarah Kolesar, K-O-L-E-S-A-R, Assistant Enforcement Counsel with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Barry Donnell Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins was previously employed as an EVS porter at Mount Airy Casino. Mr. Jenkins was arrested and criminally charged with multiple felonies for conspiring with others and depositing 17 fraudulent payroll checks into valid bank accounts to steal more than $13,000 over a 5-month period of time. The charges are still pending in this matter. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board suspend the non-gaming registration issued to Barry Donnell Jenkins.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the suspension of Barry Donald Jenkins non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. Tamara Haken, Haken, for Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the suspension of the gaming employee permit issued to Paul Dazinski. Mr. Dazinski was previously employed as a security officer at Mohegan Sun. On September 27, 2016, Mr. Dazinski was charged with 1 misdemeanor count of theft by deception and 1 felony count of fraudulent insurance claim. Subsequently, the felony charge was dismissed. However, the misdemeanor charge remains pending in the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas. As a result, OEC requests that the gaming employee permit issued to Paul Dazinski be suspended.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the suspension of Paul Dazinski's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The remaining 14 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and are licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Thereby, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, if the board orders the proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and a summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
Next on the agenda is a request to place Giovanni Gallipoli on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Gallipoli used a false identification card while underage in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board place Giovanni Gallipoli on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Giovanni Gallipoli to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel, and I further move that Mr. Gallipoli may petition for removal from the list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda is a request to place Rachel Mermelstein on the involuntary exclusion list. Ms. Mermelstein used a false identification card while underage in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board place Rachel Mermelstein on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Any questions or comments from the board? If not, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Rachel Mermelstein to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Further move that Ms. Mermelstein may petition for removal from the list anytime after her 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda is a request to place Booker Talley on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Talley exposed himself to a female patron while on the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino, and at this time the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board place Booker Talley on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Booker Talley to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda is a request to place Jared Tepperman on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Tepperman used a false identification card while underage in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board place Jared Tepperman on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jared Tepperman to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Tepperman may petition for removal from that list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good afternoon. Again, John Crow, CROHE for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter before the board is a petition to place Mamdale Saeed Alhiri on the board's excluded persons list. Mr. Alhiri placed several illegal wagers by capping those wagers while playing blackjack at Meadows Casino. As a result of his actions, Mr. Alhiri was arrested and pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board place Mr. Alhiri on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Mamdouh Saeed Alhiri to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
May I have, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is a petition to place Laura Ramirez on the board's excluded persons list. Ms. Ramirez aided and abetted her two underage children, aged 12 and 17, in accessing the gaming floor at Mohegan Sun. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board place Ms. Ramirez on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Laura Ramirez to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed? Motion's adopted.
Glenn Stewart again for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next for the board's consideration is the placement of Deshaun Brown on the exclusion list. In September of 2016, Mr. Brown attempted to use 30 counterfeit $100 bills to conduct wagering activity at Harrah's Philadelphia Casino and Racetrack. As a result, Mr. Brown was charged with 30 counts of forgery, unauthorized act in writing. According to court records, these charges all remain pending against Mr. Brown at this time. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel respectfully requests the board issue an order placing Deshaun Brown on the exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Deshaun Brown to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. John Pokoneski, P-O-K-I-N-I, E-W-S-K-I, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for the board's consideration is a petition to place Matthew McGee onto the board's involuntary exclusion list. On January 22nd, 2016, Mr. McGee entered the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino using false identification and gamed while under the age of 21. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Mr. McGee onto the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Matthew McGee to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. McGee may petition for removal from the list any time after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next two matters for the board's consideration are related, so with your permission, I'll read one set of facts and ask that each person individually be placed on the board's exclusion list. Christopher Salomo used his older brother, Pedro Salomo Jr.'s identification to gain access to Sugar House's gaming floor while underage. While on the gaming floor, Pedro Salomo Jr. aided and abetted his underage brother in gaming by giving him a $100 chip that Christopher Salomo used in the play of blackjack. Christopher Salomo was ultimately charged by the Pennsylvania State Police. I now ask that Pedro Salomo Jr. be placed on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Pedro Salomo Jr. to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Salomo Jr. may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
I believe Mr. Pedro Salomo Jr. is over the age of 21. That's his brother who is underage.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
OEC now asks that Christopher Salomo be placed on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Christopher Salamo to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Salamo may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is a request
Can I
to
stop
pla-
you for 1 second, please? Please proceed.
Thank you. The next matter for the board's consideration is a request to place Alexander Santiago, a.k.a. Aaron E. Finley, a.k.a. Aaron Edwards Finley, a.k.a. George McKay, a.k.a. Tony Rome Machian, a.k.a. Alex Santiago, a.k.a. Chris Sowell, a.k.a. Christopher Sowell, on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Santiago was caught capping and pinching multiple wagers while playing poker at Sugar House Casino and Harris Philadelphia Casino and Racetrack. In total, receiving $115, which he was not entitled. At this time, OEC requests that the board place Mr. Santiago on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Alexander Santiago to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. I believe Commissioner Jewell.
You have a point of clarification back to
Clarification.
Pedro Salamo Jr. I had in my notes here Pedro Salamo, but not Jr. after it, so I want to make sure we have the right.
It's Junior.
It's Junior?
Junior.
Okay.
So was the motion?
I said junior.
Yes.
Junior was
you did say
included because I just
Right.
Great.
listened to him.
Thank
All
you
right,
very
we're-
much.
we're fine.
And I'm glad everybody pays attention. That's good.
Good afternoon. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter today is a request for placement on the board's excluded persons list involving Richard Blair. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Blair on the exclusion list due to an incident that occurred on July 1st, 2016, whereby Mr. Blair made a threatening gesture toward a dealer at Parks Casino and also for previously being permanently evicted from Sugar House Casino for his actions at that casino. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asked that the board place Richard Blair on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Richard Blair to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The final matter today is a request for placement on the board's excluded persons list involving Ajeen Livingston. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Livingston on the exclusion list due to an incident that occurred on May 26, 2016, whereby Mr. Livingston left a 2-year-old child in his vehicle at Valley Forge Casino Resort while he went inside and played craps. Mr. Livingston was criminally charged with endangering the welfare of children, recklessly endangering another person, and leaving a child unattended in a vehicle. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asked that the board place Ajeen Livingston on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Ajeen Livingston to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you. That concludes our business.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have a previously scheduled public comment period. And as I understand it, there's no one registered today to come forward and speak. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to make a public comment to the board at this time? Seeing no one, that concludes today's meeting. Our next scheduled public session will be held in 2 weeks on Wednesday, April 5th. That meeting will begin at 10 o'clock in this room. Are there any final comments from the board or ex officios? My final comment is I'm delighted to have 2 new members of the board, and considering you guys are brand new, it was a spectacular performance.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Thank you.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's granted. Everybody have a nice week. You weren't in any way